It was one of those humid late afternoons when the air feels too thick to breathe and the sky hangs low, threatening but undecided. I had poured myself a glass of red wine and curled up by the window with a book I wasn't reading. Outside, the clouds gathered with a silent menace, and the scent of rain mixed with dust crept in through the slightly cracked window. I remember adjusting the blanket over my legs, more for comfort than warmth, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. That sound didn't belong in my quiet, solitary evening, and it echoed through the hallway like something misplaced, something that shouldn't have happened. I rose slowly, heart beating faster than it should have, and padded barefoot to the door. The hallway light flickered once, as if the house itself hesitated. I pulled open the door, and there she was, soaked through, hair clinging to her face in dark, heavy strands, a backpack slung low over one shoulder, her other hand clutching the strap like it was the only thing keeping her from unraveling. Her lips were slightly parted, eyes wide and glassy, and her white tank top was nearly transparent, plastered to her skin in the rain. I stood there, unable to move, because my brain couldn't make the connection between memory and reality. She was my brother's ex. She wasn't supposed to be here, and yet she was. Real, breathing, dripping water onto my welcome mat like she belonged nowhere else. Something inside me twisted painfully, and I stepped aside before I could stop myself. She entered silently, her sneakers squeaking softly against the tile floor. I shut the door behind her, and for a long second we just stood there, me in my worn pajamas, her leaving a trail of rainwater and tension in my hallway. I fetched her a towel and watched her blot her hair and face with slow, deliberate movements. Her hands trembled. She looked small, younger than I remembered, but also harder somehow, sharper, as if life had sanded down some of her softness and left her glistening and raw. I noticed the bruise near her collarbone, half faded and turning that sickly yellow-green. I didn't ask about it. I didn't ask anything. My thoughts were a jumble of questions, but none of them found their way to my mouth. I just stood there, gripped by an emotion I couldn't name. I told myself it was concern, that I was reacting as any decent person would if a ghost from the past appeared on their doorstep in the middle of a storm. But the truth hummed just beneath the surface of that justification. There was something else blooming inside me, something I didn't want to examine too closely yet. I led her to the living room, the wine still sitting untouched on the side table. She hesitated before sitting, glanced around as if the furniture might remember her. I saw the way her shoulders sagged slightly as she lowered herself onto the edge of the couch, still holding the towel like a shield across her chest. She didn't take off her wet clothes. They clung to her like a second skin, emphasizing the outline of her body with every slight movement. I sat across from her, perched on the armrest of my own chair, keeping a deliberate distance. But my eyes betrayed me. They moved over her without permission, down the slope of her neck, over the soaked fabric stretching across her chest, to the bare skin of her thighs peeking out beneath damp shorts. She noticed. I knew she did. There was a flicker in her gaze, a slight tilt of her head, a stillness in her breath. But she didn't speak, and neither did I. The silence was dense. Not awkward, but thick with all the things we weren't saying. Her presence in my house was inexplicable. It defied logic. She had been part of my brother's story, not mine. She had been introduced at a family barbecue years ago, young, full of fire, flirtatious and wild-eyed, too bold for someone like him, and yet he fell fast and hard. I remembered thinking, even then, that there was something about her that made it impossible to look away, something dangerous, something I envied. They didn't last. Of course they didn't. He wasn't built for someone like her. Their breakup had been dramatic, messy, full of accusations and slammed doors. I hadn't seen her since. Until now. And now she was here, half drenched, completely uninvited, and I wasn't asking her to leave. I brought her dry clothes, something loose and comfortable. She accepted them wordlessly and disappeared into the bathroom. I listened to the sound of the door clicking shut, the shuffling of wet fabric hitting the tile, the soft sigh of the cabinet door opening. My body was tense, my skin hot, though the rain had cooled the house. I poured myself another glass of wine, but didn't drink it. When she returned, she was wearing one of my oversized shirts, the hem reaching just below her hips. Her legs were bare, still glistening slightly from the towel, and her hair hung damp down her back. The scent of my soap followed her into the room, lavender and vanilla, suddenly made unfamiliar by her skin. She looked around, unsure of where to go next, and I offered her the blanket from the back of the couch. She took it with a grateful nod and curled her legs under her. We sat like that for a long time. The rain beat against the windows, a steady drum that filled the silence. I watched her from the corner of my eye, the rise and fall of her breathing, the way her fingers toyed with the edge of the blanket. She was calm now, or at least pretending to be. I didn't press her. I didn't ask what had happened or why she came to me of all people. I didn't even ask if my brother knew she was gone. I was afraid of the answers, afraid that the questions would shatter whatever strange spell had brought her here. Instead, I studied her quietly, noticed how the years had changed her, how her cheekbones stood out more now, how her body moved with a subtle kind of restraint, how the reckless fire in her eyes had dimmed but not died. I felt something stirring in me that I had kept buried for too long, something messy and unspoken, born out of years of watching from the edges and pretending I wasn't. The night grew darker, the rain softened, and still she remained. I didn't ask her to stay. I didn't need to. Something between us had shifted the moment she walked through the door, and though I didn't know where this was heading, I knew this wasn't just a visit. This was a crossing, a beginning, or maybe a return to something I'd never let myself admit I wanted. She stayed. Not for one night, not as a stopgap, not with hesitation. She stayed as though she had always belonged here, folding into the corners of my home like dust that had never left. The next morning, I woke early, disoriented by the shift in my world. The living room smelled faintly of her, rain-drenched hair, lavender soap, and something else I couldn't name but recognized instantly. The throw blanket she'd used was still crumpled on the couch, her bare footprint faintly pressed into the rug. For a few moments, I stood in the doorway, unmoving, taking in the image of her still asleep, curled into herself like a question I didn't yet have the answer to. I made coffee, more out of habit than need. The act of grinding beans and waiting for the water to drip gave my hands something to do, something to focus on that wasn't the way my chest ached in quiet pulses. She stirred eventually, drawn by the scent. I heard her yawn, soft and unguarded, followed by the creak of the couch cushions. When she entered the kitchen, her hair was a halo of half-dried waves, and she rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand like a child. She wore the same oversized shirt, and I noticed how it had shifted during the night, one shoulder exposed, the fabric falling unevenly across her thighs. My breath caught before I could stop it. We didn't speak much. Small gestures replaced conversation. I offered her a mug. She took it with both hands. She sat across from me at the table, legs crossed under her, and sipped slowly. I studied her face in the morning light, softer now, without the sharp tension of arrival. Her lips were slightly swollen from sleep, and the bruise on her collarbone had deepened into something almost violet. I stared too long. She didn't seem to mind. She asked if she could shower. I pointed toward the bathroom. When I walked past later, the door was cracked just enough for steam to curl into the hallway. I paused. From inside came the muted sound of water and the rhythmic pattern of her movements. I imagined her hands gliding over her skin, my soap melting into her pores, her eyes closed beneath the stream. I didn't mean to picture it, but the thought took root and refused to leave. I returned to my room with heat rising beneath my skin. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, she looked transformed. Not dramatically, but subtly. She left small traces of herself everywhere. Wet footprints on the tile, the scent of shampoo lingering in the hallway, her earrings resting like abandoned secrets on the bathroom sink. She carried her damp clothes in a bundle and asked if she could throw them in the wash. I said yes, of course, and found myself leading her to the laundry room as though in a dream. She stood barefoot on the cold concrete floor, her towel tucked under one arm, her fingers brushing against mine when I handed her the detergent. Later that afternoon, I found her in my bedroom folding laundry. My laundry. She had taken it upon herself without asking. My shirts lay in neat piles on the bed, my sheets freshly dried and smelling of her skin. My pillowcases were different, softer, touched by her hands. When she handed me a folded shirt, our fingers touched again, and this time the contact lingered. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, unreadable but open. I stepped back before something unraveled. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me, its rhythm mocking the stillness of my thoughts. I turned my head to the pillow beside me and inhaled. It smelled like her. Not strongly, not deliberately, but undeniably. A trace of her hair, of her skin. It was a ghost, and yet it was more solid than anything else in the room. I clutched the fabric in my hand, pressing it to my face, and closed my eyes. I dreamt of her. Her hands reached for mine in the dark. Her breath touched my neck. Her weight pressed lightly against my chest. The details blurred, but the sensation lingered long after I woke. My thighs were damp with sweat. My pulse thudded in my ears. If I rolled to my side and stared at the space beside me, the imprint of absence where a body could have been. The next day, she moved more freely through the house. She opened cabinets without asking. She danced lightly across the kitchen floor in her socks while music played faintly from her phone. She borrowed one of my sweaters, the sleeves too long on her arms, the hem brushing mid-thigh. I watched her without guilt now, or maybe with a different kind of guilt. Not the moral kind, but the kind that comes from wanting something forbidden, even if no one's around to forbid anymore. She started sleeping in the guest room regularly, though the door remained ajar. Each night I'd walk past on the way to my bedroom, glance inside and see her shape beneath the blankets, the rise and fall of her breath in shadow. One night I stood in the hallway too long, just stood, listening, barely breathing, caught in something tender and sharp. Her arm was thrown across the pillow, her mouth slightly open. I imagined myself crawling into that bed, pulling the covers over both of us, fitting myself against her back like a key. But I didn't. I turned and walked away, my feet cold against the hardwood. The distance between us was small, a hallway, a breath, a gesture, but it felt like standing at the edge of something wide and bottomless. I could taste it, her nearness, her warmth, the shape of something waiting to begin. I felt it in the way her shoulder brushed mine in the kitchen, in the way she touched the back of my arm when passing by. None of it was deliberate, or maybe all of it was. I began changing the sheets on her bed more often than necessary, not because they were dirty, but because I wanted to touch what she had touched. I started folding her clothes with more care, letting my fingers linger on fabric that had pressed against her skin. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being kind, that I was offering comfort. But the truth was simpler. She had begun to inhabit my world, quietly, completely, and I wasn't sure I wanted to reclaim it. At night, when I pressed my cheek to the pillow and smelled her, I didn't think of my brother. I didn't think of the past. I only thought of her. The laundry basket was heavier than usual, though I knew it wasn't the weight that made me pause in the hallway. It was the scent, faint, warm, and disarmingly intimate. Her scent. It clung to the cotton and linen like it belonged there, a blend of skin, soap, and something floral I couldn't name, but would know anywhere now. I pressed my face into a towel, letting the clean fabric warm against my cheek, and felt that dizzying pull low in my stomach. It wasn't perfume. It wasn't synthetic. It was her, absorbed into everything she touched. I carried the load to the bedroom and began folding it in silence, but with a reverence I hadn't realized I was capable of. Her clothes were in the mix now, almost indistinguishable from mine. T-shirts too soft, underwear delicate and unassuming, the kind of fabric that invited hands and whispered secrets. I held a pair of her sleep shorts in my hands longer than I needed to, tracing the elastic waistband, imagining the curve of her hips beneath it. I knew how they fit her. I had seen her walking around the house in them, barefoot, half distracted, reaching for coffee or curling up on the couch. I knew how they moved with her. I closed my eyes for a moment and pictured it again, and my fingers tightened around the fabric. Her laundry had become my ritual. I never told her that. I simply offered, took the basket without question, washed and dried and folded as though it were part of some unspoken agreement. She always smiled, sometimes thanked me with a soft glance or a brush of her fingers as she took a neatly stacked pile from my arms. But she didn't know what it did to me, how every thread carried her presence into my room, how her bras dried on my rack beside mine made me ache without warning. One afternoon, she left a tank top draped over the back of a chair. I walked past it 3 times before giving in. I picked it up slowly, held it against my chest, then pressed my nose into the fabric. It smelled like her neck, that hollow place below her ear where I imagined resting my lips, feeling her heartbeat stutter beneath my mouth. I let the fabric linger against my skin, my breath deepening without permission. I didn't try to stop myself. I simply let the sensation unfurl inside me, soft and steady, like the slow bloom of something dangerous. The bed became my confessional. Each night I'd lie there, body still but mind unraveling, flooded with impressions I couldn't escape. The way she moved through the house, barefoot, her steps light and unhurried. The way her shirts rode up when she reached for something on a high shelf, revealing the smooth stretch of her stomach. The way she would curl up in the armchair, reading with one leg tucked under her, completely unaware of the storm she stirred inside me. I watched her more than I should have, and I remembered everything. I began to feel her even when she wasn't in the room. Her scent lingered on the towels, on the throw blankets we shared during movie nights, on the pillow she had leaned against while watching television. I started sleeping with that pillow. At first, it was unintentional, just something left behind on my bed. But when I pressed it close and breathed in, something inside me gave way. I cradled it like a lover, my arms slung around its shape, my legs wrapped around the cool fabric, as if pretending could quiet the hunger. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake flushed, my thighs pressed together, breath uneven. The dreams were never clear, but always intimate, her voice low in my ear, her fingers brushing down my spine, her breath warm against my lips. I'd wake trembling, chest heaving, wetness between my legs a silent confession. I would lie there, paralyzed, staring into the dark, her scent still thick in the sheets, the room charged with a tension I couldn't release, or wouldn't. I kept finding excuses to enter her space, to tidy her room, bring in fresh linens, light a candle. I told myself it was hospitality, a gesture of comfort, But it wasn't that. It was proximity. It was the lingering warmth of her body in the air, the slight indentation of her weight in the mattress, the small collection of earrings in a dish by her nightstand. It was the sense that she had imprinted herself on this house in a way that was no longer subtle. Her towel, still damp from the shower, hanging over the bathroom door, made me stop and stare. I could see the outline of her body in the way it clung to the fabric, the faint imprint of her curves, the slope of her waist. I imagined trailing my hand along the path the water had taken, from her shoulder, over her chest, down her back. The fantasy was no longer shocking. It had become habitual, a private ache I fed with small moments, stolen glances, and the smell of her skin in my laundry. One evening, I opened the dryer and found only her things inside, a handful of underthings, delicate and pale, tangled together in the heat. I reached in, slowly, and one of her bras fell into my palm. My hand trembled slightly. I held it, light and warm, the cups soft against my fingers. I thought of her body filling it. I thought of her unclasping it slowly, slipping it off without thought, perhaps in front of a mirror, unaware that someone else, me, was thinking of what it would be like to do it for her. I folded the bra carefully and placed it on the top of her stack. Then I paused and pressed my hand to my chest, as though calming something frantic and wild inside me. My breath was shallow. My face burned. I felt like I had crossed a line, and yet no one had seen it. No one but me. But that was enough. The desire didn't feel foreign anymore. It felt like a second skin, worn, known, inevitable. I didn't want to wash her scent from the fabric. I didn't want to clean it away. I wanted to hold it, breathe it, wrap myself in it until it soaked into me completely. And as I lay in bed that night, buried beneath the freshly laundered sheets that smelled unmistakably like her, I knew this wasn't just longing. It wasn't just fantasy. It was memory, growing in reverse, filling in spaces that hadn't yet happened but already felt real, because now her scent was part of me, and I didn't want it to fade. It began with something small, as these things often do, a moment so quiet it could have been mistaken for nothing at all, but I felt it, the shift, the slight bend in the line we had both been towing for weeks. It happened in the kitchen, beneath the soft hum of the refrigerator and the click of the coffee machine warming up. I was leaning over the counter, half distracted by the ingredients for dinner, and she passed behind me, her hand grazing the small of my back as she moved. It was light, brief, innocent in the way that accidents pretend to be, but it wasn't. My body reacted before my brain could even name it, spine straightening, breath hitching, skin blooming hot beneath the fabric of my shirt. I didn't turn around. I didn't say anything, but that touch stayed with me for hours. From that day, the touches became more frequent. Still quiet, still soft, but never casual again. Her hand would linger a second too long on my wrist when passing a cup of tea. Her thigh would press into mine when we sat too close on the couch. She started brushing past me in narrow doorways when there was clearly enough room to avoid it. Each contact left something behind, a trail of electricity that lived beneath my skin, unseen but undeniable. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was nothing, but I knew better, because I started doing it too. My fingers would brush against hers when we reached for the same spoon. I would let my knee rest against her leg under the table, pretending not to notice. I began leaning in closer when she spoke, pretending I didn't hear her, just to feel her breath on my cheek. These were not accidents. These were permissions we kept giving each other in silence, like shared secrets passed between hands in the dark. One evening, she came out of the bathroom in nothing but a towel. She was humming softly to herself, her hair damp and curling at the edges, skin flushed from the steam. I was in the hallway, halfway to my room, and we nearly collided. She stopped short, looked up, and smiled, barely, just a twitch of her lips. But there was something in her eyes, a question, or maybe a challenge. The towel was tucked tightly beneath her arm, but the curve of her breast was visible, the line of her thigh, the drop of water sliding down her collarbone and disappearing beneath the fold of terry cloth. I stood still, frozen in the middle of a breath I hadn't finished taking. She moved past me slowly, her bare shoulder brushing mine. I didn't turn around until I heard her door click shut. My legs felt unsteady beneath me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on top of the covers, the window cracked open, the air cool against my skin. My fingers drifted over my stomach, up to my ribs, then lower, moving without command. I touched myself in silence, trying to quiet the ache, to release the tension that had built up like steam behind a locked door. I imagined her mouth, her hands, the towel falling to the floor, the sound of her breath tangled with mine. When I came, it was with her name on my lips, though I didn't say it aloud. It trembled in my chest like a secret too loud to silence. In the morning, everything looked the same, but nothing felt it. I avoided her eyes. She didn't push, but something in her had changed too. She started sitting closer, letting her head rest on my shoulder during movies, letting her feet find mine under the blankets. There was a softness between us, but it wasn't platonic anymore. It was loaded. It was alive. Then came the night I found her in my room. She wasn't snooping. She was curled up on my bed with a book, barefoot, wearing one of my old shirts. She looked up when I entered, unbothered, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I stood in the doorway, heart pounding. She patted the bed beside her without a word. I sat down, slowly, unsure. She kept reading. I watched the curve of her thigh beneath the hem of the shirt, the way her toes flexed against the sheets. I couldn't focus on anything else. After a while, she closed the book and stretched, her body arching, her arms raised above her head, the movement lifting the shirt just enough to reveal the soft skin of her lower stomach. I looked away too late. When I glanced back, she was already watching me. Not surprised, not smug, just steady. That gaze lingered in the room long after she left. I started doing laundry more often, not because it needed doing, but because I wanted to bury my hands in the fabric that had held her body, her shirts, her sleep shorts, the warmth still clinging to the cotton like an invisible fingerprint. I would press my nose to them when no one was watching, letting the scent flood me. My room began to smell like her. My thoughts became tangled with the shape of her. Every interaction became a test of restraint. The way she leaned over the sink, the way her fingers curled around a pen, the way she lay on the couch, one leg bent, a stretch of thigh exposed beneath the loose fall of her shorts. I could feel myself unraveling, piece by piece, pretending nothing had changed while everything inside me was coming undone. And still, we said nothing, not a word, not a confession. Just those glances, those touches, those silences that thickened like honey between us. The border we had both respected for so long was beginning to erode, not with a bang, but with a whisper, a breath, a pulse. The first crack had formed, and neither of us was trying to seal it. It happened slowly, like all inevitable things do, not with a declaration, but with the gravity of something long denied finally giving way. The night was quiet, the house folded into a hush that felt like waiting. The air was warm, heavy, touched with the scent of whatever candles she'd lit earlier in the living room. Amber, maybe sandalwood, something earthy that lingered on the skin long after the flame was out. I had been in the kitchen cleaning up, hands wet from dishwater, mind fogged with the kind of thoughts I could no longer call innocent. She stepped behind me, quiet as breath, and without a word, her fingers grazed the back of my neck. I didn't move. The touch was soft, tentative, but not unsure. Her nails traced lightly down the slope of my neck, following the line of my spine until they reached the top of my shirt. I closed my eyes. My heart slowed and quickened all at once. I stood there, dripping water onto the floor, trying to remember how to stand without swaying. She didn't press, didn't speak, just let her hand fall away as easily as it had come and walked past me toward the hallway. I dried my hands in silence and followed. The bedroom was dim, only the bedside lamp casting a low, golden halo against the wall. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, barefoot, hair tied up loosely, wearing a tank top that clung to her like a second skin and a pair of sleep shorts that made it impossible not to stare. She looked at me, not with question, not with permission, but with certainty, like she had been waiting for me to arrive, not just in the room, but into this moment. I stepped forward. She didn't move. When I stood in front of her, she reached up, slowly, deliberately, and let her fingertips graze the inside of my wrist. That was all it took. My body lit up like it had been waiting for that single spark, and without a word, I sank to my knees in front of her. Her hands moved to my face, gentle at first, brushing her thumbs across my cheekbones, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Her palms were warm. Her skin smelled like salt and something sweet. She leaned forward, and for a second I thought she might kiss me, but instead she let her forehead rest against mine, her breath mingling with mine in the space between us. Her hands began to move with more intent, down my arms, around my shoulders, fingers slipping beneath the edge of my shirt. My skin tensed beneath her touch, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of being seen, of being handled like something precious. She pulled the fabric over my head and let it fall to the floor. I was bare from the waist up, knees pressing into the rug, heart thundering so loud I was sure she could hear it. But she didn't hesitate. She placed her palms against my chest, flat and firm, and let them rest there, just resting, as if grounding me. Her thumbs brushed against my skin, and I exhaled shakily, eyelids fluttering. Then she stood, guiding me gently to my feet. Her eyes never left mine as she pulled me forward, and I followed, breathless and open. She sat again on the edge of the bed and pulled me between her legs, her hands sliding up the sides of my thighs, then around to my lower back, holding me there. I felt her mouth press against the center of my chest, not kissing, just resting there, and I thought I might melt into her completely. She undressed me slowly, with the care of someone unwrapping something delicate. Her hands were sure, steady, reverent. When her fingers traced the waistband of my shorts and began to slide them down, I didn't stop her. I couldn't. I stood naked in front of her, my skin prickling with exposure, my breath shallow and uneven. She looked up at me for a long moment, and then her hands moved again, around my hips, across my stomach, up the curves of my sides, until they settled on my ribs like she was learning the shape of me. I lay back when she guided me. The sheets were cool against my back, her body warm above me. She climbed over me slowly, stretching out until our hips aligned and her hair fell forward like a curtain around our faces. Her mouth found my shoulder, then the hollow beneath my collarbone, then lower, slower, lips mapping a path that made my toes curl and my hands clutch at the sheets. I arched beneath her, not because I wanted to move away, but because I needed her deeper, closer, everywhere. When her tongue finally touched me, I gasped. a sharp, involuntary sound that filled the room like an answer to a question I hadn't known she was asking. Her hands slid beneath my thighs, lifting slightly, and she began to move with a rhythm that was unhurried but relentless. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every stroke, every flick, every pause, it was as if she had studied my body in silence and committed every nerve to memory. I tangled my fingers in her hair, my breath coming in stuttering bursts, my hips trembling with the force of holding back. I didn't want to hold back. When release came, it shattered through me in waves, pleasure radiating from the center of me outward until I couldn't feel where she ended and I began. I cried out, raw and breathless, her name caught somewhere between moan and exhale. She didn't stop until I collapsed, spent and boneless, fingers slipping from her hair, heart racing against the sheets. She climbed up beside me, her body folding into mine with terrifying ease. I felt her arm wrap around my waist, her breath cool against my damp skin. I couldn't speak. I didn't need to. She kissed my shoulder, then the side of my neck, then just pressed her lips into the space behind my ear. I closed my eyes and let myself drift into that silence, into the weight of her limbs against mine, the sweat drying on our bodies, the hum in my chest that still hadn't faded. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't need to. Her hands had said everything. Her touch had spoken louder than any apology or confession ever could. She knew exactly how to unmake me, and she had done it with devotion, with care, with something that felt suspiciously like love. And I had let her, willingly, completely, finally. The morning was unusually still, as if the house itself had gone quiet to preserve what had passed between us. I woke with her body curled into mine, our legs tangled beneath the sheets, her breath soft against my shoulder. My skin was still marked by her mouth, faint bruises blooming like flowers along my ribs, the insides of my thighs still tender from the night before. I didn't move. I lay there with my eyes closed, absorbing the weight of her presence, the scent of our skin mingled and warm beneath the cotton sheets. When she finally stirred, it was with a contented sound in her throat and a lazy stretch that pressed her body deeper into mine. She nuzzled the back of my neck for a moment, then pulled away gently and slipped out of bed. I listened to the soft sounds of her in the hallway, the floorboards creaking under her bare feet, the fridge opening, the metallic clink of a pan being set on the stove. I stayed where I was, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, breath slow, mind thick with memories that pulsed behind my eyes like an aftershock. Eventually, the smell of something rich and unfamiliar drew me into the kitchen. It was savory and sweet, warm and dense, unfamiliar but deeply compelling. She stood by the stove in one of my oversized shirts, her hair tied up, sleeves rolled, stirring something in a saucepan with focused ease. Her movements were graceful, practiced. The kitchen was dim, the blinds drawn just enough to let in slivers of morning light. She didn't turn when I entered. She just kept stirring, and the scent deepened. There was something strange about it. Not wrong. No, not exactly, but strange. It clung to the air with an intensity I couldn't name, rich and meaty, layered with spices that felt old, like they belonged to a place I had never been. My stomach growled despite myself. She glanced over her shoulder then, smiled softly, and gestured to the table. I sat. She served the dish without ceremony, placing the plate in front of me and pouring coffee into my favorite mug. The food was beautiful, glistening in the light, steam curling up like a ghost. It looked like pasta, coated in a deep, dark red sauce, with slivers of something slow-cooked and tender melting into the dish. I picked up my fork. The first bite was stunning, complex, layered, sweet and peppery, with a depth I couldn't place. I chewed slowly, trying to separate the flavors. Tomato, wine, clove, cinnamon, and something else, something I couldn't identify. I looked up to find her watching me, her expression unreadable but steady. She was leaning on the counter, arms crossed, mug in hand, eyes fixed on me like she was studying every movement. I swallowed, unsure why my chest had gone tight. I asked what kind of meat it was. She didn't answer right away, just smiled again, that same smile she had given me at the door the day she arrived, and turned away to rinse her mug in the sink. I stared down at my plate, the fork still halfway to my mouth, and suddenly I wasn't sure I wanted another bite. But I ate. I ate because it tasted good, because her eyes were on me again, because I didn't want to ask what I was afraid to know. After breakfast, she disappeared into the bathroom. I stayed at the table, the now empty plate in front of me, a strange heaviness in my limbs. I felt full in a way that went beyond food, like something had settled inside me that didn't belong. I pushed the plate aside and stood. My hands trembled slightly as I rinsed it in the sink, the water hissing too loudly against the ceramic. Later, while putting away the dishes, I opened the trash and noticed the wrapper. It was small, folded, pushed deep into the bin. Something about it made me pause. I reached down and pulled it out. A butcher's label, half torn, stained with red. The cut was listed vaguely, and the name of the shop was one I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a long time, something tightening in my throat. It felt old, foreign, not from the neighborhood, not from anywhere I had ever seen her shop before. A sharp unease slid under my skin like cold water. I thought of the way she'd watched me eat, the weight of her silence, the way she had smiled, so serene, so satisfied. I went to the laundry room. I don't know what I expected to find, but I opened the hamper anyway. It was empty except for a single towel, stained faintly with something brown-red, half-dried. Not blood, I told myself. Could be wine, could be sauce. But my gut said otherwise. My gut twisted. When I returned to the kitchen, she was there again, leaning against the counter, sipping tea, her eyes calm. Too calm. I wanted to ask her. I wanted to demand, but my mouth wouldn't open. I just stood there. She walked up to me, touched my arm gently, and kissed my cheek. Her breath was sweet with cloves and sugar. Her hands lingered on my waist. That night, I found a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages of a book she'd left on the nightstand. A small, neat square. I opened it with a sense of dread, my heart thudding too loudly in my ears. It was her handwriting. Just one sentence. He was always a little too attached to you. No name, no context, but I didn't need either. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the paper, my fingers numb. I tried to piece it together. The timing, the food, the towel, the missing calls from my brother I'd ignored all week. My stomach clenched. I pressed my hand to it, as if I could will it to empty itself, but I had already swallowed it. The meat, the warmth, the sweetness, the truth. She came in moments later, her shirt slipping off one shoulder, her smile slow and soft as she reached for me. I didn't stop her. I didn't move. Her body slid into mine like it belonged there, her mouth on my neck, her hand on my thigh. My limbs obeyed. My breath shook. My heart refused to decide between horror and desire. And maybe that was the most terrifying part of all, because I let her touch me, even after knowing, even after tasting, even after understanding. And when she whispered my name that night, curling around me like milk around blood, I didn't pull away. I only closed my eyes.